I've been playing video games for a long time. And as long as they've existed, the industry responsible for them has been riddled with race issues. Whether it's stereotypical portrayals or just the lack of diversity in general, games haven't been too welcoming for players of color. But worst of all, gaming online is a really toxic and racist environment.
Big black big black big black fucking fat big black
In 2002, NFL quarterbacks Peyton Manning and Matt Hasselbeck played each other in a game of NFL Fever. There was a twist though. The two players were thousands of miles apart. Microsoft used this event to promote Xbox Live, an online gaming service that allowed people to play and talk with each other without being in the same room. Enter middle school me, who just got his hands on a copy of Halo 2. This was post 9/11, so kids with weird names like mine weren't the most popular at school. To get away from some of the bullying at school, I turned to video games. So imagine how 12-year-old me felt when I logged onto Xbox Live for the first time and was almost immediately called the N-word. As I got older, the same things kind of happened. People were still calling me the N-word and saying racially insensitive things to me. After a while, I just kind of got used to it. It was normal, and it was just something I had to deal with if I wanted to play games online. It's not just Xbox. PlayStation and Twitch have these issues too. There are countless examples of this online.
Gaming is not made for women, people of color, right? It's really not made for marginalized bodies.
Kishana Gray is the director of the Equity and Gaming Lab at Arizona State University. She published a study that followed 4 black gamers and their experiences online. The players mentioned that they experienced racism online a lot and that they kind of just got used to it.
A lot of folks have just normalized what happens to them in the space. Because I remember like back in like 2007, 2009 or something like that, you know, Microsoft had issued this press release that said, you know, racism is not a problem on their network, right? But they were solely relying on the quantitative data, the number of complaints that people would file. And because you know, a lot of gamers of color had normalized what was happening to them, they wouldn't file the complaints, right? People don't do it because they, in their mind, they think that nothing's going to be done. They think that, you know, the stakeholder within the space, Microsoft, Xbox, whoever, doesn't care about that and about what's happening to them.
I'm not really playing competitive games as much anymore, so I'm not talking to as many people online. But I know that professional gamers can't really avoid it. Terrence Miller is a professional Hearthstone player. He faced a very public display of racism during a tournament. A bunch of commenters in the Twitch chat were sending tons of racist messages directed towards Terrence. The chat moderators couldn't keep up. How did that affect you, just like as a player in general? How did you feel when you left the tournament and you knew that this happened?
I'm like on screen playing at the time, so I don't really know what's going on. I'm getting a bunch of like messages on Twitter and like Discord and stuff like that. Everyone's like, all this stuff happened, like, are you okay? Like, I know my mom saw it for sure, and she didn't really understand like why they were like that at the time, and I just kind of had to like explain it to her.
At the tournaments and at the events, can you talk about your experiences there as a black person? Is it way different than it is online?
It's definitely way different than it is online. Like, I've experienced no racism like whatsoever. People are anonymous on the internet, so like they're one way when you're not around, and then when they know that you're there, they're like more careful with what they say.
The fact that people act wild behind a computer screen isn't that surprising. But is anonymity the driving factor behind the racism in online gaming?
Yeah, I think it is the driver for racist comments, yes. You know, so in that piece, you know, I talked about, you know, this online disinhibition where when people get online, they'll say and do things that they normally wouldn't do in physical spaces, right? Which is just what Terrence M described, right? He was like, wait a minute, y'all call me the N-word online. Like, y'all here now, you're not saying nothing, right? Because it could be real life repercussions, right?
So how do we solve this? Microsoft's current strategy is a reputation system. The more bad reports you get, the worse your reputation is. If it gets bad enough, you're only allowed to play with people who have similar bad reputations. But gaming companies should have zero tolerance when it comes to racism. Racist players should be permanently banned. That's a no-brainer that provides immediate relief to players of color. But outside of banning players, I think there's something that can be done in the long run. It really comes down to diversity. gaming companies should be held responsible for changing the culture of gaming as we know it. When companies discuss how to fight racism online, are voices of color being included? And if so, are they being listened to? Here's an example of how diversity could help.
So I was banned because I asked a guy why he called me the N-word. All that they saw, all this algorithm saw, was that I used the N-word and then I had to be ousted from the space. So think about, a lot of black men, utilize like the N-word in their everyday speech practices and their everyday text practices, and then they get banned because they've used the N-word like in these spaces. So for instance, if I was at the table with Xbox whenever they decided this, I could have told them black people are gonna get punished. Black people who might use this in their everyday speech practices are going to be the ones that get punished from this. So I get what you're doing, but you need to have more people at the table to help to be a part of this decision-making process.
It's not just diversity in employment either. Terrence says a showcasing of diverse players could also help fight racism.
In the fighting game community, there's like a lot of people of color, and I feel like you don't really get these kind of stories coming from that game.
When I reached out to Microsoft, they told me that keeping everyone safe was a priority for them. That's great to hear, but further measures need to be taken. What happened to 12-year-old me should be an outlier and not the norm.